Alright everybody, welcome to what is the first of hopefully many deck tech videos from Zach Sells Magic Productions. My name is Zachary Evans. Of course you might be familiar with us from our F&M broadcast, but due to popular demand, a lot of people have been requesting other content, specifically Commander content. So we did a brief poll on our website. Of course, that's at zachsellsmagic.com. I'll let you decide which of my Commander decks you wanted to see me run down. So the winner by a narrow margin was the Mimeoplasm, which we see here in front of us. For those of you unfamiliar with the Mimeoplasm, he was printed in the pre-made Commander decks from last year. He is a 5-cost creature, 2 and then 1 each of green, blue, and black. He's a 0/0 base, but when he comes into play, you can remove 2 creatures from any graveyard. They can be both from your graveyard, they can be both from other graveyards. Doesn't matter. One of them, the Mimeoplasm becomes a copy of, and the second one, he gets +X counters equal to the creature's power. So basically, he's a graveyard-based strategy. He can get really big really quick. You can incidentally hate out your opponent's graveyards, and then make a really big, really interesting clone of a creature. Plus, he's like the most awesome guy in the world. I mean, he's like, he has a T-Rex for an arm, so you can't go wrong with a commander who has a T-Rex for an arm. So let's just start blasting through these cards here. First off, we're going to go over the Reanimator theme cards. So there's a lot of different ways you can build the Mimeoplasm. It does kind of have a a non-combo with some of the cards that work out of the graveyard, because you are exiling them once they disappear. To imprint them on Mimeoplasm, you have to exile them from the graveyard. So you only get one shot at them, but oftentimes that is worth the investment. Plus, you have other ways to interact with your own graveyard. So let's just start with Reanimator cards. The first, Animate Dead, one of the most confusing cards in the history of Magic. Even the reprint from the Graveborn series last year had this basic block of text. So basically, it's a creature enchantment cost 2. Reanimate a creature. The only downside is that it gets -1, -0, and of course, if you remove the enchantment, it will go away. But just an easy, cost-effective way of reanimating a creature. Reanimate, the easiest way to reanimate a creature. A lot of times, if it's your turn to go and you're drawing on your first turn, a lot of times it makes sense to draw your card, just immediately discard some giant fatty, and then on your next turn around, play a black source and reanimate. Pay some life, but again, in a game where you start with 40, very lucrative. Living Death is kind of a sweeper. It's twofold. It basically clears out all the creatures that are on the board, but it also reanimates all the creatures in every graveyard. So when I first started building this deck, this is the youngest deck of all the EDH decks I play. This card was kind of tricky because at first I was starting with things like Consuming Aberration and Mind Grind and Keening Stone, trying to put cards in opponents' graveyards, but a lot of times they don't really have anything that's worth stealing with your Mimeoplasm or your reanimation effects. So I took all that stuff out, and then I put Living Death back in, because obviously your graveyard is usually going to have more fatties in it than other people's. So you can tutor for this, clear the board, get some of your big guys back. Definitely a card you want to have in this archetype. Dance of the Dead, another 2-cost reanimation spell with an essay's worth of text in it. Basically, you have to pay to untap it, but a lot of the creatures you're putting into play, you're not necessarily using to attack anyway, so that's fine. Also, the Dance of the Dead and Animate Dead and Reanimate, all of those target any graveyards, as well as Necromancy. Necromancy is another enchantment. You can cast it as an instant, and then it dies at the end of turn, but if you just cast it during your main phase, it's another Animate Dead style enchantment. And again, targets any graveyard, so you can kill somebody's dude and bring him back. And then Beacon of Unrest from the Beacon series in, I believe, Mirrodin block, lets you reanimate a creature from any graveyard. Also reanimate an artifact, which comes up more than you would think. It helps you dig out of mana situations by stealing someone's soul ring or other crucial artifacts. So, and that one, of course, reshuffles back in, so you can tutor forward again. And then Dread Return. Dread Return is kind of basically a zombify in this deck. You don't often get to sacrifice 3 creatures for the flashback, but the fact that it is a flashback card in a Reanimator deck, it just seems like it's too good to pass up. Not necessarily. It's probably the weakest reanimate spell. And then Rise from the Grave, another 5-cost spell that reanimates from any graveyard. Again, not the best spell, but you do want a certain level of redundancy of them, and it targets any graveyard as well. So now we'll move into the cards that help fix your draws, draw cards, and then as well some cards that are just kind of standard in the EDH deck. So obviously top, self-explanatory, really helps you fix out fix out your draws in Phyrexian Arena. I am playing a predominantly black deck, and there's no better way when you start with 40 life to draw cards than with Arena. Now, Traumatize is a remarkable card in this deck. What it reads is basically you pay 5 mana and target player puts the top half of their library into their graveyard. So most of the time, I'd say 90% of the time, I'm targeting myself with this. Excuse me. And in this case, when you target yourself with the Reanimator deck, the card might as well read draw half your deck, because you want all of your cards in your graveyard. And we'll get into a little bit later, there are a lot of other cards that let you take advantage of so many cards in your graveyard. So Traumatize on yourself, very powerful in this format. Of course, Rhystic Study, draw cards whenever your opponents tap out, basically. Another must-have card. And then Forbidden Alchemy from Innistrad. You use it for the same reasons you would use it in standard Solar Flare back in the day. You're just drawing 4 cards and you're putting one of them into your hand, usually the Reanimate spell, and then some random fatty in your bin. You have so much flashback and so much interaction with your graveyard, you could really care less if you're putting 3 cards in your graveyard. So this card is perfect. Instant speed. Factor Fiction is basically the same thing. They make piles, and then they have an enviable task of deciding which ones they want in your hand and which ones they want in your graveyard, knowing that most of the good cards you want in your graveyard anyway. And again, instant, so you can cast end of turn. Thirst of Knowledge the same way, lets you draw cards and then pitch them again. So Bribery is a card that it's not really thematic in any sense. It's just one of the best cards in EDH, and this is one of my more competitive EDH decks, though I hate the phrase competitive EDH. I mean, it's just one of the stronger ones. So Bribery obviously keeps everybody honest. You know, if somebody's going to put a Blightsteel in their deck, they deserve to have it briberied. So that's just speaks for itself. Now we'll move into the tutor package. Increasing Ambition. It's a very expensive tutor, but when you flash it back, you get 2 cards. And again, you're working out your graveyard so much. And in this deck, you are ramping fairly hard, which we'll see a little bit later. So you're going to have ample opportunity to get 3 cards out of this card. Then let's talk a little bit about Birthing Pod. Actually, we'll come back to Birthing Pod. So the rest of your tutor package, pretty simple. Demonic Tutor speaks for itself. Diabolic Tutor speaks for itself. Buried Alive, now have it in the tutor section because basically you're tutoring for 3 creatures. More than usual, I'm searching for cards like Sheoldred, and then 2 other situational cards. Sheoldred obviously being the best card in this deck, creature-wise, and we'll get into that. But Buried Alive puts 3 creature cards into your graveyard. Super powerful. I will mention right now that I don't own a copy of Entomb. Actually, it's not that I don't own one, it's that I only own a foil one, and I have a strict no foils in EDH policy, because if I start foiling part of the deck, I will never stop foiling the rest of it. That's a very expensive hobby. But Entomb obviously is a one-shot at Buried Alive. It might not be good enough actually in this deck, but it's definitely worth testing out. But let's talk about Birthing Pod. So this was an idea I got from a friend of mine. So he built a similar deck, and he had a Birthing Pod chain in it. Of course, Birthing Pod's super fun if you ever played it in Standard or you're playing it currently in Modern. It's fun to tutor, and it's especially fun to tutor for creatures that have Enter the Battlefield abilities. And a lot of the creatures, as we'll get into later, have those Enter the Battlefield abilities that you can abuse. And Birthing Pod is great. It's relatively mana light in terms of the commitment that you need to use it. You can cast it without ever having a green mana on the battlefield, though you will often have them. And then again, it puts creatures in your graveyard, which is where you want them usually anyway. So Birthing Pod is really cool in this deck. You don't by any means need it to survive, and it's not like I've constructed the entire deck around this single card, but there is a Birthing Pod chain that I took into consideration when coming up with the creatures. Now we'll talk a little bit about the removal and the utility cards in the deck. So first of all, Cyclonic Rift. If you're playing blue in EDH and you're not playing Cyclonic Rift, it's probably a mistake, because the card reads the overload reads all of your opponents. So in a multiplayer game, it's a one-sided upheaval basically. Obviously not for lands, but there's very few times where I've cast this card overloaded and not won the game in Cube or in the EDH. It's a very strong card, so obviously you want to play that. And if you just bounce something, it is a boomerang effect, so that's pretty good. Spin into Myth, one of the few tuck cards, as I like to call them, Chaos Warp Oblation, stuff like that. It's one of the few you have access to in these colors. Obviously you put your opponent's general on top and then Fate Seal it to the bottom. Very important to have in this case. In a worst case scenario, you can use it to scry if you want to, but that never happens. Ashes to Ashes is the most efficient removal spell in black, in my opinion. You take out 2 creatures, you remove them from the game. 5 life is a pittance when you start at 40. And then Beast Within, if your EDH deck can't deal with giving your opponent a 3/3 creature, then your EDH deck is something is seriously wrong. Obviously, you build these decks to do crazy degenerate things, go over the top, so giving your opponent a 3/3 is an excellent swap for a Vindicate at instant speed, which is what Beast Within is. So Life's Finale, it's a 6-cost Wrath. Any Wraths are good, obviously, but Life's Finale is particularly good in this archetype because you get to put creatures from your opponent's deck or from target opponent's deck into their graveyard, so it gives you more Mimeoplasm and Reanimation fodder. So this one is super good, ties in perfectly with the deck. Clear the board and give yourself a chance to get a fatty back into play the following turn. O-Stone is pretty self-explanatory, another sweeper effect. One thing I'll mention later is I don't currently have enough copies of Damnation to have them in every deck, so you also obviously want to play Damnation in a black EDH deck as well, because we're not putting a lot of creatures on the board. You usually want to be able to sweep the board. You have a hard time with some of the more aggressive aggro decks. We'll just talk a little bit about the ramp cards too. So I'm playing Cultivate and Kadama's Reach. I'm also playing Sky Shroud Claim and Explosive Vegetation, although Explosive Vegetation, it occurred to me when I was piling this deck out, should clearly be Ranger's Path because I have 4 forest dual lands in the deck as well. Soul Ring speaks for itself. Chromatic Lantern is super good, I think, in these 3-color decks because it just helps your fixing so much. Yeah, it loses to Creeping Corrosion type or Fracturing Gust kind of effects, but you know, a lot of people aren't going to waste a removal spell on your Lantern, and it just fixes your mana for the rest of the game. So definitely want to play that. And then of course Mana Reflection. I am playing green, and you can't go wrong with Mana Reflection. Untapping with Mana Reflection feels like you feel like a kid at Christmas because you get to do everything you want to do. Mana usually is not an issue. Sometimes you have a hard time figuring out how to use all that mana. So obviously Mana Reflection is a very strong inclusion here. You got Lightning Greaves. It never hurts. Helps you protect your fatties, protect your commander, and then get into some incremental damage. Mimic Vat, super good in every EDH deck. If you're not playing a Mimic Vat in your EDH deck, that is a mistake. Mimic Vat is my #1 most underrated card in the history of Magic. Anyone who knows me locally knows that I harp upon that, and I trade for everyone that I see. Mimic Vat's so good. It doesn't matter if you're killing a lot of creatures or you have a lot of creatures that are worth killing. Anytime something dies, you can steal it. So it's incidental graveyard hate, and then it's a great way to get a fatty under there. You know, in the old days, you get something like a Primeval Titan or a Solemn Simulacrum under it. It just feels like cheating. It also has some great interactions with Birthing Pod because you sack your creature to go get what you want, put the creature you sacked out of the Mimic Vat. Hilarity ensues. Lots of fun for you, not so much for your opponents. So Mimic Vat's super good. And in Crucible Worlds, you're playing a lot of spells that put things into your graveyard, not necessarily of your own choosing. A lot of times they just get milled by a Traumatize or some kind of dredge effect. So Crucible lets you buy those cards back. It also gets you get a lot of work out of your fetch lands with Crucible as well. And then Life from the Loam. Life from the Loam is super good in regardless of format, but in this deck it's also amazing because not only does it help you get your lands back, we've got the cycling lands in here as we'll see, utility lands as well, but you just get a dredge 3 every turn. So a lot of times if you cast this on turn 2, you'll end up with half your deck or over half your deck in the graveyard by the time the game ends. So Life from the Loam, super strong. Then Blatant Thievery, another card that's not thematic at all. It's just one of the best cards in Commander. So it costs 7. If you're unfamiliar with Blatant Thievery, for each opponent you get to select and gain control of target permanent. So that's target permanent, so you never whiff on this. And you get the best creature someone has, or you get that Maze of Ith that you can't beat, or you get their Mimic Vat, or you get whatever artifact or enchantment that's bothering you. It's a great card. You'll definitely want to play it. It only gets better in multiplayer games. And then one copy of Army of the Damned. Again, it's not really thematic. There's no particular reason other than the fact that it ends up in the graveyard a lot, and a lot of times flashing back 26 power worth of zombies is good enough to win the game by itself. So I like that one. Fun. Rite of Replication, super obvious. It's played in almost all blue decks that ramp. You play it by itself, you clone something, it's always good. A lot of things in this deck worth cloning. You clone your opponent's commander to to get rid of them, and then you kick it, and then degenerate things happen. Try kicking that on a Rock's Faithmender. Things go very well for you after that. And then another card, Spitting Image. So Spitting Image is basically a clone effect, but it has Retrace. And then so you can discard a land and play it from your graveyard. So again, it has that pseudo flashback. You have cards like Life from the Loam and Crucible of Worlds to get your lands back should you need them. But then it's just an endless copy of tokens. So you can constantly, with this in your graveyard in a steady stream of card draw, you can keep pitching lands and keep your opponent's commanders off the board. You can copy your own creatures. It's very strong in this deck. So I would definitely look into that if you're not playing it. Now we'll get into the creatures. They are sorted by casting cost for the Birthing Pod chain. By no means are these supposed to be correct. Oh no. Had a brief technical glitch. Happens every time as my screensaver comes on. But so by no means do I mean any of these cards, specifically creatures, but any of these cards are the absolute correct cards to have. They're just the ones that I think are pretty good. There's a lot of things you can mix out and stuff. So we'll just go through now. So first, Eternal Witness. Eternal Witness is a great card to have because you put so many cards in your graveyard. And a lot of times you put cards in your graveyard you have no way of getting back. Things like Life's Finale, other removal cards like that. So Eternal Witness basically serves as a tutor in and of itself, that once you have it in your hand, you can get whatever you want back. If you've hit a big traumatize, even if it's in your graveyard, you can reanimate it. I don't actually have a copy of Volrath's Stronghold in this deck. I don't have enough of them to have it in every deck. But Volrath's Stronghold and Eternal Witness basically lets you tutor for the best card in your graveyard every turn. So Ewit is definitely something you want to have in this deck. Solemn speaks for itself. It's just a solid card. Works well with Birthing Pod because you want it to go away anyway to draw a card. My other 4-drop, Phyrexian Metamorph. Obviously you want to play as many clone effects as you can because it not only does it help you copy your awesome creatures with Enter the Battlefield triggers, but it nugs your opponent's commanders as well. Then we move into the 5-drop. So Lord of Extinction, super good in the deck if you've ever cast Traumatize on yourself and then cast Lord of Extinction on turn 6. It feels like cheating. It's one of those late game cards that just inevitably ends up being 20, 30, 40 power without you really trying. It's situational, but it's super good. Skithiryx is one of the more degenerate cards in this deck, and a lot of times when you cast a card like Buried Alive, you'll go get this in certain situations. You'll try to avoid it in other situations because it is kind of the a-hole card, if you will. People might not want to play with you after you do this, but basically you get Skithiryx and you get a 6-power guy from any graveyard, and then your Mimeoplasm, which is a general, remember, is going to be a 10-10 flying infect, so you can give it haste because it's a copy of Skithiryx, and then attack immediately for the win. Skithiryx by itself will win a lot of games because it does have regenerate. Very strong, but it's like a Blightsteel Colossus. You never feel real good about yourself after you cast it. Another 5-drop Corpse Connoisseur, basically an Entomb with flashback or unearth for a creature. So you can pod into this guy, entomb a bigger creature that you want, and then pod this guy out again to go get a 6-drop. Very good entomb effect, super on theme. Rexiel is just a fun EDH card. It's on curve. We need some 6-drops. This one we don't necessarily mind going away because it's not good in every matchup. A lot of decks don't have a good instants and sorceries for you to steal, or islands and swamps for you to attack unblockable. But Rexiel's super strong. It's 5/8. It's tough to deal with when he's on the board, and you can take advantage of people who are unwilling to take their time warps and time stretches out of their deck. Consecrated Sphinx is it's a card that I think probably should be banned in Commander. It's very degenerate, but you're playing blue, you might as well play it. Another 6-drop. And then Deadeye Navigator. There have been more games have been conceded to, or I have conceded to in other people's decks, than Deadeye Navigator. Paired with things like Runescarred Demon or Primeval Titan back in the day, Solemn Simulacrum, or any of the Primordials, which we'll talk about, can get very, very degenerate very quickly. Another 6-drop. If you don't have this guy in any of your decks, you're going to want to play with him. Now we move into 7s. Moldergraph Monstrosity is actually really fun. It basically lets you reanimate 2 creatures when it dies. It's a 8/8 creature with trample in and of itself, and then when it dies you get 2 creatures from your graveyard back at random. So this is the perfect 7 in your pod chain. So you pod out your 6, you go get this guy on 7, then you pod him out for one of your 8s, and then you get 2 cards back. It's super strong. Your opponents won't want to kill him. They can't really attack into him depending on what's in your graveyard. Super on theme. Runescarred Demon is a demonic tutor that you can reanimate, and you can search for with a pod. I don't really know what more you want me to tell you about this. Kicking around a replication on this guy usually means you win. You're cloning this guy a lot. You're reanimating him a lot. He's perfect in this kind of deck. Now we'll talk about the Primordial set. They just came out in Gatecrash. They're all really good. The three best ones, in my opinion, are all in the bug colors. So Diluvian Primordial comes into play, and you get to basically use Rexiel's ability on all your opponents' cast, or Spell Twine, I should say. Cast an instant or sorcery from one of your opponent's graveyards for free, or from all of your opponent's graveyards, one each for free. Sepulchral Primordial does the same thing. It rises from the grave from each of your opponent's graveyards. And then Sylvan Primordial, the new Prime Time, as I like to call him, might be better than Primeval Titan in some cases. But basically, it's a Bramble Crush effect other than lands. So it's a Bramble Crush effect, I should say. The only thing you can't kill is creatures. So for each opponent when it comes to the play, each opponent you get to destroy a non-creature permanent, and then for each permanent you blow up, you get to go get a forest. So the key here is that it's a non-creature permanent, so you can hit lands. So you never whiff on this. So you're going to kill one permanent for every opponent, almost every time. And then you're searching for forests and putting them into play tapped. You're not searching for basic force. You're searching for force, so you can go get your breeding pools and your bayous and all that kind of good stuff. This guy's very good. Having this guy paired with the Deadeye Navigator makes you feel like you need to take a shower. Then we go back into the Praetors. They came out in New Phyrexia. They are all super good. Shielded is the best card in this deck. It is a reanimation spell, and it is removal. Forces your opponent to sack. You get another creature from your graveyard every turn. More than likely, you're always tutoring for this lady. She is very strong in this deck. Now, Stormtide Leviathan is a card I've recently put in here just to kind of, because this deck doesn't have a ton of removal, doesn't have a lot of ways with dealing with the swarm decks. And Stormtide Leviathan is one of those ways where basically it shuts down everything except Island, Walk, and Flying. Most of the swarm decks don't have flying creatures. They're mostly ground-based elves or saprolings or other kinds of tokens. So Stormtide Leviathan is in there for that reason. I'm just testing that out for right now. What I'm not testing out is Vorinclex, because Vorinclex is another just jerk of a card. He lets your opponents, or he forces your opponent's lands to stay tapped for an extra turn, doubling your mana. Having this out, Mana Reflection out, is cheating, basically. He's very strong. I consider taking him out a lot, but then someone does something degenerate of their own, and I leave him right in. So Vorinclex is very strong. Woodfall Primus is the same kind of thing as Sylvan Primordial. It's a disenchant effect on a stick, and it has Persist, so it's tough to get rid of. You can pod this guy into a 9 for no loss. Very strong. He also has Trample. Artisan of Kozilek, also on theme. I mean, it's a 10-9 Annihilator for with 2, so that in and of itself seems like a pretty good card to play in Magic. But also, when you cast him, you get to reanimate something, which is perfectly on theme. More importantly, he is the only playable 9 that chains into your 10 on the Birthing Pod chain, and that 10 is Jin Cataxia's Core Augur. He is another card that you don't necessarily feel great about. People have to kill this card immediately, or the game gets out of hand. Lets you draw 7 at the end of every turn, and they have to discard down to 0, basically, on their turn. Lets you draw a ton of cards, which is great. Your hand is usually going to be super full, so you have to discard, so you can put more fatties into your graveyard. He has Flash. I don't think I've ever cast him for his Flash ability, because you always want to cast him on your turn so you control the cards. And if they can't deal with him in one turn, they're going to lose their entire hand. Super strong card. You have a 100-card library. You could care less about decking yourself. Usually the game is over by that point. And now, last but not least, we'll go through the mana base. I do have the real dual lands and stuff in here. In a 3-color deck, obviously, you want to make sure your mana is fixed pretty well. So first, starting off, Reflecting Pool, Command Tower. All these cards basically tap for whatever color mana you want. Urborg is a must-have in a black deck, especially a 3-color black deck, so you always have swamps. Temple of the False God, another auto-include, just helps you ramp easily. Dagmor Salvage, it's a black source, but it has Dredge, so it's another card that you can help mill some cards into your graveyard. You'll notice in a lot of these cards we're not milling or dredging hardcore, but for the lack of tempo of playing a card tapped, it's really not that big a deal to add the one Dagmor Salvage to your deck. Cephalid Coliseum is another great card. Lets you, with Threshold, you can draw 3 and discard 3. The same reason they play it in the Legacy Dredge is the reason you're playing it in your Mimeoplasm EDH deck. Nephalia Drownyard, you're used to it in Standard as a win condition in control decks, but in this deck, it taps for mana, which is all you can ask for it, but then occasionally you can mill yourself for value. Has some interactions with other decks too. If they stack something on top of their deck, you can mill it away. If they cast Enlightened Tutor or Vampiric Tutor, it's hard for them to get any value out of it with this card on board. I'm playing I'm playing 2 of the Champions block legendary lands. Minamo lets you untap most of your creatures. A lot of your creatures are legendary, as well as Mimeoplasm being legendary. And then Shizu, actually more important than Minamo in this deck, because it allows you to give your Mimeoplasm fear, and then you can get in for some commander damage, because Mimeoplasm does not by itself have any evasion. Strip Mine's in there just to deal with nuisance lands. You do have the Strip Mine Crucible of Worlds, Strip Mine Life from the Loam combo, which is something that I would not recommend unless the game is very late or your opponent is being an atypical jerk, because that is not fun to play against. Thespian Stage just came out. It's basically a Vesuva effect. I actually didn't have a spare Vesuva, so I just tossed in the Thespian Stage. It's really good in this deck because you can use it to kill legendary lands of your opponents, but you can also use it to fix your mana, and then later in the game you can reassign it, basically make it a copy of something else that's more lucrative. And then Homeward Path, you're playing a deck that has all these awesome fatties in it, and the last thing you want to do is have them briberied or control magicked or whatever effect gets stolen. So just a simple tap of your Homeward Path, and you're good to go. You're playing lots of tutors naturally, so you can tutor for this if you want. And then the rest of them are a little bit self-explanatory. I'm playing the 3 on-color fetch lands. I'm playing the 3 real dual lands. Ignore the price tags. I just had some perfect fits and put them in there. And I can't put them on the back, otherwise they'll show up on the back. I'm playing the 3 Ravnica block shock lands. I'm playing 1 Drowned Catacomb for whatever reason. I guess I don't have the other 2 of those lands. And then the cycle lands, which are good in and of themselves, but also pair very well with Life from the Loam. They use it's a legacy deck, so obviously it's got to be pretty good for your commander deck. And then a crap ton of basic lands in various combination. So that, of course, is my Mimeoplasm EDH deck. I'll take a brief second here to talk about some cards that I don't have in the deck that you might want to consider. Like I said, I don't own a Damnation. You might want to put that in there. Obviously you want that in there. Entomb as well. Volrath Stronghold. Put creatures from your graveyard back on top. Other cards that I've considered and haven't used in the past: Windfall. You discard your hand and then you draw cards equal to the... everybody discards their hand and you draw cards equal to the most cards discarded that way. It's a good way of getting a lot of cards in your graveyard, but I find in my experience that it's not necessarily as lucrative, because a lot of times you don't want to dump your entire hand. We've got Guest Grimoire. Basically lets you, over the course of 3 turns, gain control of all creatures in all graveyards. You also can use that as a discard outlet, but I've just determined it's pretty slow, and this deck doesn't necessarily draw a ton of cards, so you don't always have that card advantage where you want to get rid of stuff. Frantic Search, I just not playing for whatever reason. Another looting effect that untaps your lands. Probably should be in the deck. Tooth and Nail, don't have an extra copy of for this deck, but it basically lets you search out 2 fatties from your deck. Probably should be in there as well. Regrowth, you might want to play since you're putting so many cards in your graveyard. And then obviously you can switch up your various fatties to whatever floats your proverbial vote. So that's been the first Commander deck tech from the Zach Sells Magic production team. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Make sure to visit our Facebook page. Go to facebook.com/ZachSellsMagic. Leave any comments you might have in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what you think about the deck, what changes you might make, or what deck you might want to see highlighted next time. So from everyone here at the stream, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you later.